Drones have become an essential tool in the daily work of rangers in Xishuangbanna, an autonomous prefecture of the Dai people in Yunnan province, southwest China. The miniature aircraft are used to better monitor the tracks of wild Asian elephants in southern China. Before the wildlife enters local villages, a warning is sent to the villagers, who then evacuate their homes to avoid contact. In Xishuangbanna, where the number of wild elephants has nearly doubled since the 1980s and their habitat has been steadily restored, wildlife encroachment on human space has become common. Prior to this year's World Environment Day, my colleague Heyang joins Deep Dive to share her safari experience in the autonomous prefecture, how the locals have restored the environment, and what we can learn from their practices. This episode is brought to you on Tuesday, June the 4th. So, Heyang, how was your trip to the kingdom of animals and plants as a city person?
It was eye-opening, just a fantastic experience. For me, I'm a bona fide Beijinger, and actually I think it's a weakness that you've only been raised and grew up in big cities. So I was very nervous, actually, before going on this reporting trip, because I know I would be camping in the Wild Elephant Valley, which is inside the Mengyang Natural Reserve in Xishuangbanna Dai Prefecture. And I was really nervous about that. Also, I knew I was going into the villages, I was going into the rainforest, and I just didn't know what to expect.
So you were practicing your wilderness survival skills.
I was learning on the job, as I always do, and that's the quickest way to learn. But it was just a great experience because I've never really come into such close contact with wildlife this much.
Most of us.
Yeah, I guess so. And then this region is renowned for its rich biodiversity, including 80% of forest cover that are home to numerous rare and endangered species. And we're talking over 5,000 plant species, 800 vertebrates, and countless invertebrates, and up to 300 wild Asian elephants roaming free there. And these are the only Asian wild elephants that we have in our country now.
Yeah, so these days, Xishuangbanna is really known for its biodiversity and the rich environment. But I believe this hasn't come that easily. Are there any environmental issues that the locals had to resolve to achieve what they have achieved today?
Well, like you said, Xishuangbanna in Yunnan province is known for being this wonderful place for wildlife, and they have experienced quite severe reduction in rainforest coverage. And I think that's part of urbanization because for the last many decades, when you've got cities expanding and farmers need to plant crops to feed themselves as well as a revenue source possibly, and therefore deforestation and a reduction of forestation, that's an issue. But they've really put in a lot of effort to really reverse the tide to some extent on that one. And another major issue that locals have encountered is climate change. This year so far, during my trip, I've heard from countless people it has been a very dry year, and if not the driest of the decade. And this is even compared to 2021, when a herd of wild Asian elephants left their natural reserve, their natural habitat, and went all the way north looking for food and water. And this year is even worse than that year so far. So we're hoping for more rain this year for sure.
Yeah, the main purpose of your trip this time was to visit the Asian elephants there in Xishuangbanna, and their current population has actually almost doubled from the 80s. And were these environmental issues that led to their population to decline over that period? And also, how have they accomplished this incredible recovery work of elephant population?
Well, in the past, actually, the drop in population of wild elephants and so many other different types of wildlife have had a lot to do with their natural habitat being encroached by human activity. I think that's no news for people. But for the recent 3 to 4 decades, the local people, as well as the authorities and NGO workers, they've all come together to work on different levels from different aspects. Have they contributed to this achievement of doubling the local wild elephant population to a precious 300? And as an outsider, when I first saw 300, I was like, that doesn't sound like a lot. But actually, after my trip, I've realized this 300 wild elephants, these are trunk-wielding giants, and they are more than a handful for locals to handle. So actually, to boost the elephant population to this level, it is quite remarkable. And it's a multifaceted approach that different parties and stakeholders have contributed to the success of it.
You mentioned NGOs and local government, and how do all these parties work together to accomplish this?
Okay, so I'll start with the local governments, and they get orders from higher up chain of command, obviously. So I think this is showing that in China, from the national level, the government is hands down serious about protecting the environment, about stopping the loss of rainforests. And the local government has set up a robust warning and alert system. So they've actually employed a squad of rangers that are equipped with drones and infrared cameras. To spot the wild elephants, and once they do, they immediately alert the villagers to stay away from a certain area because the elephants are coming. So in China, what we're seeing now is that humans are actually giving way to wild elephants to protect them. And also, since 2010, in Xishuangbanna, the local government has actually set up a special fund, and they're paying out in the form of insurance to locals who come across wildlife and are endangered by them or have financial loss due to, let's say, elephants coming into your village and destroying your crops, destroying your home. Those kind of things are compensated. And we're talking about more than 30 million yuan that's in this fund every year that's paid out in the form of compensation. So the compensation, I think, is essentially what is getting the local villagers on board fundamentally to boost their efforts in conservation and also staying away from the elephants. And on top of that, you've got the local governments encouraging the local people to come up with alternative livelihoods. So in order to reduce the probability of people to come into contact with the wild elephants, which mostly live in the forests, in the mountains, then humans, if you can conduct your livelihood at the doorstep of your village instead of going into the mountains, let's say to harvest wild mushrooms or, bean sprouts or whatnot. So the government has encouraged all these alternative livelihoods, and NGOs come into play as well as they work with local governments as well as the villagers in coming up with all these community projects. One is beekeeping. So, on the African continent, powerful bees have been used to deter wild elephants from coming into the villages or come into contact with people. But in China, the Zhonghua Chinese bee is of a softer gentler nature. And therefore, these bees have been used to harvest honey. And when the farmers can sell honey instead of farming crops or going into the mountains and coming across with the elephants, but they have a way to make money and to sustain their lives. And that is what has been encouraged by these NGOs as well. And another thing I found out is a fantastic blend of conservation as well as development. That is creating these bird ponds. And these bird ponds are used to attract all kinds of wild birds to eat, bathe, and maybe socialize in their world. And then there's this camouflaged hide nearby where photographers can take pictures, can appreciate the beautiful wild birds in their natural habitat, well, with minimal human intervention, I suppose. And then in Mengyang County, Piaohai Bird Pond has become a favorite for bird watchers around the country. And the local people would provide you with, transportation, accommodation, and a wonderful chance to observe birds in the wild, also offering guided bird tours. And this is all contributing to their revenue stream. Therefore, if they can sustain a pretty good living, why go into the mountains and risk coming into contact with wild elephants?
So there's a concerted effort from the central government to the local ones, which includes helping the local villagers find other means of making a living financially to support themselves. So they would make room for the elephants and maybe live in peace together with the wild animals.
Yeah, because when we look at the international experience, like in Africa and also in some of the other Asian neighboring countries, which also encounter the human-elephant conflict problem, it's easy to see sometimes animosity intensifies, and local people can be very frustrated, mad, and some even resort to retaliation killing of wild elephants, because if the boundaries are blurred between human life and wildlife, and then the elephants come into your field and eat up your hard work of crops of a whole year or a few months, anybody would be mad. And yeah, so therefore in Yunnan province, actually this time I am pleasantly surprised to see what they've done, and the concerted efforts have worked well for the elephants for sure.
Yeah, so there are financial compensation to the villagers as well. And also they hired rangers to give warnings to the locals, and when the elephants are moving around, conducting their activities. But I'm wondering, is it possible to circle, let's say, to circle this area and keep it just for the elephants?
Oh, that's already done. Because in Yunnan province, again, this rich gene pool of biodiversity, plants, animals, or whatnot, there are multiple natural reserves here. But humans are developing our cities, our communities as well. And then there are these natural reserves, but right outside the natural reserves, you have humans conducting their business. So therefore, these animals, or these especially wild elephants, they're so massive, and then they do not respect the boundaries. They will wander out of the natural reserve if they see fit. So therefore, that's when, the spillover effect kind of happens.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because these animals, they wouldn't strictly be living in the confines of those designated areas.
Of course. And also, wild elephants don't respect passports either. They will not only wander outside of Yunnan province to other places, they wander outside of China to our neighbors in the Laos.
Even cross the national borders.
Exactly. So you can't really stop them in that sense.
Yeah, so I guess it is unrealistic to, let's say, continuously, unlimitedly expand the area, the confines of the natural reserves.
That's true. And this is obviously hugely costly to expand the natural reserve or natural park maybe, and then this is a decision that ideally should result to public deliberation maybe, and also balancing the wants and needs of the local people, as well as, what you see best for the wildlife we're talking about here. But we have seen in Yunnan that they are trying to see if they can enter the bid for the second batch of national parks. So in 2021, the first batch of 5 national parks administered by the national level were rolled out, but Yunnan missed its chance then. But now, from the stakeholders that I've interviewed, it seems like a lot of people are betting on that this new national park could be set up in Yunnan province, and therefore we could be looking at expanded areas for the wild elephants to roam.
Yeah, so it is difficult because there will be many spaces that are overlapping between where the animals are and us humans are. And when you try to, let's say, designate more spaces for the animals, then you also have to think about how realistic it is to share these spaces from humans with animals.
Well, the thing is, we've taken up so much room from the animals, from wildlife anyway, already. So we have taken so much. I mean, yeah, I understand that maybe people will say, oh, it's a bargain.
Right.
But still, if you realize what we've done to the planet already, it might make you think a little bit differently about this. And usually when we encroach on their land of wildlife, they retreat. Why do you think so many species go extinct? Usually they retreat. But when it comes to wild elephants, because they're so big and then they wander around and they need huge space to wander around. And that's why it becomes news. And that's why we're talking about them. Because during my trip into the natural reserve in Mengyang County, actually, the locals said that they used to have rhinos in Yunnan, but they've become extinct more than 100 years ago already. So most likely is, without us knowing, these animals and plant species might just not exist on the face of Earth anymore.
So if there's a balance point between the spaces for human and the spaces for animals, then we are perhaps still pretty far from reaching that balance point to give back the spaces for animals.
I think you're right. Also, once the habitat is gone, they're gone for good.
Or it may be extremely difficult to recover.
It is so difficult to restore land. And I understand this is a big theme for the World Environment Day this year. And let's hope that we don't get to the point that we need to sort of flip back on the switch. Let's try not to lose the land first. Let's try to slow down the pace of taking their land in the first place, because restoration, it takes decades and it's just very, very difficult.
And this balance of spaces between humans and animals is probably a very valuable lesson for any places in the world that are facing environment issues. Thank you for joining us, Heyang.
Thank you for having me.
The theme of this year's World Environment Day is land restoration. But as we've learned from the experience of Xishuangbanna, this is an extremely challenging undertaking that requires enormous financial resources and the full commitment of everyone involved. While this should not stop us from the restoration of nature, it is perhaps more important to cherish the remaining wild spaces we have. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Deep Dive. If you enjoyed what you just heard, don't forget to follow us on your podcast platform Just search for Deep Dive. You can also leave comments to let us know what you want to learn about China and beyond. This episode is brought to you by me, Li Yunqi, and my colleagues Zhang Zhang and Qi Zhi. Special thanks to CGTN Radio reporter Heyang. I'll see you in the next one.